All right, good friends. Welcome back. Tom Cowley, INN World Report Radio. All right, now strap yourself in, buckle your seatbelts. Dr. Webster Tarpley, Professore, Herr Doctor.
Tom, come on.
Okay.
Let's get to it.
Perfect example. He's already cut me off on my own show. Anyway, Webster Tarpley's in the house. I have to back away, not because I just want to, but because I want. He's the only guy I can do that with. Dr. Tarpley, welcome back to INN World Report. There's so many things to talk about. Syria, Obama is versus Syria, Turkey a little bit, but on the top of the pile is this whole curiously timed leak with this guy Snowden in the former British colony of Hong Kong through the British Oracle, The Guardian, and so forth. What are your thoughts? I've spoken about them, but it's better to hear them from you yourself.
I would like to propose to people that it may be possible to discredit Snowden as a triple agent. In other words, as a playback agent, as a deployment of the intelligence community, and discredit him and take him down. In other words, defeat a CIA psychological warfare operation. I think this is now within our grasp if certain people would just step forward. The relevant groups are, of course, the left liberals, and we have some signs of stirring skepticism there. And then we have the libertarians and the right-wingers and so forth, the anti-government crowd, and they have tended to fall into this operation at the beginning, but as you were just telling me, it's possible that they will eventually turn away. The predicament of the libertarians is acute because a lot of the libertarian area was created based on a rejection of the 9/11 story told by the Bush administration. But the problem is that since these libertarians have been sucked into the Rand Paul universe, they've become essentially an appendix of the Republican Party, and they're tending to buy covert operations and psyops, the ones that target Obama, because they're so blinded by their hatred of Obama. And this is a very fundamental point. People were so blinded by their hatred of Clinton that they bought George H.W. Bush, so blinded by their hatred of George H.W. Bush that they went for Obama. And now we've got people that are so blinded by their hatred of Obama that they're willing to embrace various monstrosities. So, but as you were saying, there's a possibility that some of these libertarian characters might wake up. I'm just seeing that Bill Ayers talks about Obama as a terrorist. Well, when you hear Bill Ayers, that's the intelligence community. That's an intelligence community provocateur, part of the, what can we call it? The FBI CIA operation that wrecked Students for a Democratic Society, created the Weathermen, wrecked the anti-war movement, the student movement, and so forth. So here we have a professional intelligence community wrecker coming out against Obama. And what I'm driving at is this. The current situation is that the financier establishments, right, the enemy, the banking establishments of London, the City of London, Wall Street, and so forth, their number one priority is to start this war with Syria. They want the United States embroiled in a war with Syria, which will then expand into a war with Hezbollah and probably a war with Iran. You would have then the United States at war with a block of countries that would include Hezbollah, Lebanon. It would include Syria. It would include Iraq, once again, as a Shiite government, and then Iran, and maybe beyond, maybe Pakistan too. That one I can't really say, but the ones that I've said so far are very plausible. So the number one priority is to stop that. The number one priority is to not go out and have conniption fits and become hysterical about snooping and spying that you've known about for the best part of 10 years. In other words, the NSA, right? Well, we know we had warrantless wiretap under Bush, and now we have wiretaps with warrants under Obama, probably more of them. That seems to be the idea. I don't really know. And then that they read your your email. Well, we know that, don't we? I can't think of any person who's not a complete cretin who hasn't not assumed since about 2005 or even 2004, since the passage of the Patriot Act. You basically figured that they're reading all those things. And then we have Ed Snowden coming up with the following earth-shaking revelations. Tom, this time you brace yourself, okay? You're going to brace yourself? Do you realize that when there are international conferences in Great Britain, the British government, through GCHQ Cheltenham, which is, of course, the Siamese twin, in some ways, of the National Security Agency.
They share the same spinal cord.
They have that coaxial cable or
fiber optic backbone.
The biggest fiber optic tube in the world goes between those two. In theory, whatever Cheltenham knows in real time, GCHQ, whatever that they know, then that is known immediately in NSA. In Fort Meade, Maryland, in theory, because the British undoubtedly withhold things, and maybe the U.S. does too. But do you realize, Tom, that when there are international conferences, they spy on those international conferences? And
right here in my city, New York, whenever the UN gets together, they got hotel rooms bugged, everything. Yeah.
And another one. There's another real shocker. Let's see if I can just remember what this one is. That the United States hacks into Chinese assets. Can you imagine that? I talk to people who are responsible for computer systems at fairly large institutions, and they tell me that they get hacked in a determined, systematic, repeated way by sources from China basically all the time, especially institutions of higher learning with a research dimension. The Chinese are hacking into those the whole time. So we've known, I'd say, since about...
Or at least it looks like the Chinese are hacking. It could be Westerners hacking with a Chinese garb.
No, I think there's pretty good possibility that the Chinese are hacking. Doesn't have to be the Chinese government, but that there are Chinese hackers, this is for sure, and that the Chinese government does nothing to shut it down. I think that's also for sure. But can you imagine that the U.S. hacks back? In other words, this is the secret of the...
I can't imagine that the U.S. does not hack back. In fact, I can't imagine that the U.S. did not hack first.
Maybe. It's possible. I don't know.
He who hacks first hacks last.
That's a chicken and egg problem. But in other words, this character Snowden, this bombastic, self-righteous, self-promoting character with his sentences, he's ready to die for the country, and he's perfectly aware that this wonderful existence that he got for himself is all going to be lost, and that, and then his exaggerations. That's the other thing about Snowden, is his exaggerations are, it's like listening to Sean Hannity, right? If you tune into Sean Hannity in the afternoon, he'll say, do you realize that the Social Security lockbox is empty? Well, it's not empty. We have, at the current rate, the Social Security system can pay the benefits well into the 30s, right? Into the 2030s, right? 2034, 2035, I think it was. And Medicare has another 13 or 14 years in it too, just at the current levels. Or he'll say, the stimulus didn't do a damn thing. Well, that's very sweeping. It must have done something, and I think it actually did do something, although it didn't. It certainly didn't create a recovery. So if you listen to Snowden, he talks in a way that will be appealing to a reactionary, right-wing, low-information listener, somebody who's accustomed to Limbaugh, Hannity, and people like this. Like he'll say, "Do you realize that I was a lowly analyst, but I could tap anybody's phone and read anybody's email, even the president." So the slippery slope. You get the
hold on. Point of order. I have not certainly researched it as much as I'm sure you have. I didn't get that he was a lowly analyst. I thought he was some sort of a systems programmer or something like that.
Well, all right, fine. Call him whatever he was, right?
No. There's a difference. Webster.
He might have gotten to middle management. Anyway.
No. Wait. Webster, point of order, personal experience here. When you develop a system for people, okay, you have to have the highest level access to the system because you're writing the system, you're creating the system, you have to test the system.
Yeah, but wait, that's not what he says. He says that any analyst can read anything. That's what he says. Check it. He says any analyst.
Well, if the security of the system has been left wide open like that, yeah, sure.
Fine. The point is that he's making wild exaggerations, which I don't think are they're suspect. Anyway, this is not even the main point. The general idea, though, is that this person is a triple agent. At the bottom level, or the most obvious, he's an NSA CIA agent. He's a U.S. government agent. Okay. Then he becomes a defector, a whistleblower, some say a traitor working for the Chinese Wu Jin intelligence agency, whatever it is. But my thesis is he's a triple agent. In other words, his loyalty is filled with Langley, for whom he is carrying out a precious function. And what is it? Look at the timing. It was on Wednesday, the 5th of June, that the city of Qusair fell, the main fortress of the Syrian terrorist death squad, the opposition to Assad. And this was crushed by Hezbollah and the Syrian army in a vice. The thing was encircled, and large numbers of terrorists were killed. And it's like Stalingrad, right? It's a decisive battle. And it also reminds me a little of the Falaise breakout in World War II, right? If you remember, right after the Normandy invasion, there's a period of very little movement, right? Where the beachhead,
the hedgerows,
the bocage of Normandy. So it doesn't go anywhere for about 2 months, right? All of June, all of July, well into August. There's almost, at least to the end of July. And then all of a sudden, there's this breakout at Falaise, and the German army is not thrown back, 10 miles or 20 miles, but really all the way to eastern France and practically to the German border and the border of the Netherlands and so forth. And that's what you see in Syria right now, that the terrorists have been driven back on Aleppo, which is a couple of 100 miles to the north, right? It's way north. So they've lost the entire area of central Syria has been lost to these death squad killers.
That's a perfect point to hold. Yes, it's very interesting. Hold, please, Dr. Tarpley. We'll be right back with Webster. Just getting started. Another 45 minutes with him right after this. All right, good friends. Yes, we can. We can make it if we try. And part of that trying is to reject the swill that you're being served up by the conventional, the corporate media, even the left alternative media. You got to check yourself. Do a gut check in your institutions, in your college education. Are you learning this kind of stuff? Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley in the house right now. And Webster, before break, you were talking about the possibility of this guy, Snowden, young guy with a magical, it seems, existence, right to the head of the class, no college education. He's, access to all this stuff. Great job.
High school dropout, community college dropout earns between $120K and $200K.
Pretty good deal. Sounds like another magical, enchanted existence of another young man who was useful to the establishment, many decades ago. I'm talking about Lee Harvey Oswald. You're telling me possibly a triple agent. He's in China right now. The Chinese are thinking about what they should do with him. There was a young Marine named Lee Harvey Oswald who worked on the U-2 project. As soon as he got out of the service, went right to Russia. Right. Similar fashion, offering secrets. The Russians didn't know what to do with this guy at first. Lee Harvey Oswald looked to me like he was a triple agent. Is there any parallels here?
I mean, there are triple agents. That is certainly one of them, right? So I would say Lee Harvey Oswald, the base level is he's some kind of military intelligence. There are other findings that he was an agent of the U.S. Customs Service. He was a kind of a contractor for a number of different agencies. But then going to Russia, there's also an attempt to sheep dip him in Cuba. But underneath it all, even though he's defecting, he officially defects, comes back from Russia, tries to defect to Cuba, comes back from that because he couldn't get in. There are multiple Oswalds. When I was looking at the life of Snowden, I'm wondering, are there multiple Snowdens? this is another interesting question, but this also occurred to me. Let me tell you why. Oswald has this wild career, right? Some years spent in New York City. We don't need to go into Oswald too much. Let me tell you about Snowden. What's his story? Comes from around here, pretty much, North Carolina, I guess. Drops out of high school, drops out of community college, but then gets to enlists in the U.S. Army May 2004.
Drops out of that too.
Join the special forces. He wants to fight for freedom in Iraq. He's out of that, according to some, because he broke both of his legs, but that's anybody's guess. Then, low-level security guard at the National Security Agency language facility here at the University of Maryland. Then he goes on to computer security at the CIA, including Switzerland. Then he becomes a private contractor for the NSA at a U.S. military base in Japan, and official job NSA Kuniya Regional SIGINT Operations Center in Hawaii. In the course of this, he does work for an MA at the University of Liverpool. So he's got an interesting life. He's also epileptic, interesting aspect. His two big mentors, Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald is a border guard, a left liberal, in my view, very corrupt. This is a bitter, systematic enemy of 9/11 truth. This is a guy who essentially supports humanitarian intervention. I would say he has a kind of a smokescreen of hemming and hawing over Libya, but he's certainly not against attacking Libya. He's got concerns, right? He has to show his concerns. And then he's got this Laura Poitras that I don't really know much about, but Poitras. She is a documentary filmmaker. So Greenwald and Poitras come together to try to make the myth of Snowden. Now,
through the Guardian, through England, not
Guardian,
through the Washington Post.
In other words, the whole thing is under the aegis of British intelligence. The London Guardian is the left wing of British intelligence. It's got big MI6 input, big Foreign Office input, big London banking, but always left, right? It's the cult of Dionysios. The cult of Apollo is over at the London Daily Telegraph and the London Times. This is the cult of Dionysios. These are the leftists. These are
the wine drinking aristocracy that like to have orgies.
Whatever they are, the cocaine or laudanum. They were for laudanum. Remember that Assange called himself Mendax. Assange called himself Mendax, the liar. This character calls himself Verax, the guy, the truth teller, I guess. But now, let's just go through a quick typology. I'm trying to say that this is an operation. The goal of the operation is what you see. It is to attack Obama, and it's the most effective attack on Obama that we've seen. Obama has lost 18% of his support among the younger set, and he's generally gone down by, I think, 8%, according to a poll. This is because, of course, the American people are not, they are concerned about this question of civil liberties, right? Obama's base, in particular, is very concerned about this. This is a kind of operation that wouldn't work on somebody like Bush, because Republicans, of course, don't care about this stuff in most cases. So it's been a very effective attack. The goal of the attack, though, is not to, just to hurt Obama. It's to get him to do something, because the attack is accompanied by calls from London, from Paris, very public, from the Israelis, maybe not so public, but extremely strident, and from the neocons, which are pretty...
Dick Cheney, if we'd have had this intelligence, Cheney, we could have prevented 9/11 while I was on the job sleeping.
But the point is to attack, that it's time to attack. It's McCain and Lindsey Graham. These are the two to watch. So those are the people that are demanding war. And you got to understand now, Obama is saying no. I see a lot of libertarians, a lot of left liberals. They're so blinded by their hatred and their prejudice. They can't understand Obama has been saying no on these wars. Obama has, after all, ended the Iraq war. and McCain and Graham have been screaming that they wanted a permanent garrison. Well, there is no permanent garrison. There is no permanent base. That's over. The Afghan war, as of today, right? Today is the turning point. Today, all of Afghanistan is under the primary responsibility of the Afghanistan army. The last provinces have been transferred to primary responsibility of the Afghanistan army and police. And then there's also this thing about the authorization to use military force, right? The post 9/11, the equivalent of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. I never mention this without reminding people that Ron Paul voted for it. He voted for war. He voted for dictatorship. He was just for it before he was against it. But Obama has talked about repealing that particular monstrosity.
Unusual for a president to talk about rolling back some of their own power, no?
I've never heard Ron Paul or Rand Paul talking about repealing it. I'd like to hear that. But no, it's Obama who talks about it. So I would say this. I'm also not a fool, right? I was the first anti-Obama voice really in the world, I think, in very early January 2008, right, sort of diagnosing what this was. And I wrote 2 books trying to stop Obama from getting to the White House because it has not been a successful presidency. But now we have to be great realists, right? Now the guy's won 2 elections, like it or not. This is what you're stuck with. So now the question is not getting rid of Obama or not, or any of this other crap that these right-wingers will tell you. It is, can you stop the Syria war? Because the Syria war is unlike all these others. This is a country that can fight back. They have real modern weapons. You can kill them, but they may be able to kill you. And that's
the Russians are supporting
the Russians are there. The Iranians are there. Hezbollah.
The Chinese, who knows, right?
Hezbollah is altogether formidable. Hezbollah has defeated the Israelis, defeated them twice, once in Lebanon and then again in 2006. I mean, in Lebanon means in the late 70s, early 80s, when the Israelis were ultimately they were driven out, right, in a war that started, it went on for decades. And then in 2006, when the Israelis tried to reinvade Lebanon, they were defeated by Hezbollah and the Iranian
by ragtag Hezbollah, comparatively speaking.
It's not ragtag. It is a very formidable.
No, I'm saying comparatively speaking to the vaunted IDF with all its backing.
It just shows you that it's not what you think, right? In other words, ragtag has got to be redefined.
Well, hold on, comparatively. Hold on, friends. Webster Tarpley, interesting as always. Right back with him just after these messages. All right, good friends. Welcome back. Tom Kiley, INN World Report. Let's go. We got another half hour with Dr. Tarpley. He'll set your hair on fire, which is something that certain, dedicated FBI agents had, they claim, when it came pre 9/11 to try to warn the country. But thanks to people like, Dick Cheney, that hair fire was put out. No, it's being put back on again. Dr. Webster Tarpley. Webster, we were talking about the possibility of the Snowden guy with his charmed, magical existence, being a triple agent. Certainly the effect has been devastating for Obama. He's below 50% in the popularity rating for I think the first time in his presidency. Where does all this take us?
You can see that it's a covert operation. It is a psyop. It is a limited hangout operation where a mass of carefully prepared doctored materials, which the intelligence agency wants to put into circulation, are not simply released, but they're associated with the figure of a rebel, a defector, a whistleblower, a lone hero who challenges these huge institutions. And of course, it's a complete myth. And we can show this using the examples of Ellsberg and Assange, who are similarly manipulated or witting assets in this way. Let me just go through the typology, though. I wrote an article about this. You can see it at tarpley.net, I think, by tomorrow. It may be up already on the press TV of Iran. How about this? Just a couple of ways you can tell, right? Because, my stock in trade is I can show you the conceptual method to understand these things, right? If you're dealing with violent terrorism, false flags, state-sponsored things like this, you need to be on the lookout for moles, the private network inside the government that does it, loyal to Wall Street, not the government. You need to be looking for patsies, right? The fanatic, the double agent, the dupe, the psychotic, the criminal element, whatever, the Oswald, the Atta.
If I may, Dr. Tarpley, isn't this the way the world actually works? Certainly, you're a student of European history. You lived there. This is Italy. This is the Roman Empire. The conspiracy is the norm for a great...
Yeah, fine, but I just wanted to try to tick off these things because this is not even the main point right now. But the moles, the patsies, and the technicians, right, the people who actually do these things behind the scenes, these are people you generally never see. And then the importance of drills and exercises. Okay, so if you've learned that, you know how to analyze those ones. But now it's different. We're talking about these limited hangouts. So what do we find here? First of all, that the limited hangout protagonist, right, the hero of the limited hangout, becomes an instant media darling, right? With Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, he had 17 newspapers publishing his doctored, tendentious, misleading Pentagon Papers, starting with the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, and all the rest of them. Now, if you had any experience in 9/11 truth or maybe even Kennedy assassination matters, this is not what they do if you're not welcome. You have to be welcome to them. In other words, they have to want to hype your story.
Even more accurately, they have to have a gun held to their head and say, hey, this ragtag is coming. You better do your job and open the door for them.
Yeah. Well, in fact, right, if they don't like what you're doing, then it's going to be silence or slander, right? You're going to be a Ku Klux Klansman, an anti-Semite, a white supremacist, and a kook, a raving lunatic. Unfortunately, it is also
frothing libertarian
that in these movements there are lots of kooks who are attracted by what they see as the irrationality of it all.
And kooks are cultivated, by the way. I get hit every day by people who say, hey, Tom, look at this. The Jews are trying to do this and the Jews are trying to do that. There's people that are constantly trying to drag you down into some tar pit somewhere. You know, it's very,
All right, so
not tar pitly,
in the case of Assange, right? He had a pre-constituted media cartel. His stuff was published by the New York Times, the London Guardian, again, El País of Madrid, Spiegel of Hamburg, and Le Monde of Paris. And Assange had been introduced to public opinion by Cass Sunstein, later of the Obama White House, the husband of this Samantha Power. And he had written the great article, Brave New Wiki World, Washington Post, February 4th, 2007, saying, there's a great new group, and they're going to destabilize China for us. Now,
and he also wrote, familiar to this audience, he also wrote that we need to, all these crazy, insane 9/11 truth people, we need to infiltrate them with cognitive dissonance.
The cognitive infiltration of extremist groups who embrace conspiracy theories. But now, the Brave New Wiki World says WikiLeaks is going to attack China. And I would say Snowden is the redirection of this mass of assets back to its original goal, which is to attack China. Now, Snowden, of course, is a darling of all the media. I don't want to go through all these details. It's in front of everybody's eyes, right? The London Guardian becomes his home base. The left liberal Greenwald. Notice Greenwald again, enemy of 9/11 truth. Assange, enemy of 9/11 truth. We've just had the endorsement of Snowden by this Norman Solomon, who is another big border guard type, right? A gatekeeper, anti-9/11 truth. So they're very selective about the covert operations they're interested in and the ones where you become crazy. In other words, these are people who are right on the border and they want to avoid the messy questions where you might become a conspiracy theorist, because that for them is the worst of all possible worlds.
Well, it's the end of their funding.
Right, precisely. But these are people that are now protected. So what have we learned so far? That they become immediate media darlings. They're really preemptive, right? Even before they come out, they're media darlings. On the other hand, the stuff that they have is not new. There's nothing new in it. The Pentagon Papers have nothing new. If you read Le Monde, and as you were telling me, Agence France Presse, or as Joe Calhoun was talking about in his speech there in New York, Agence France Presse was telling you all this stuff, which is basically the Pentagon Papers and more you could read in a French or Italian newspaper. That's Ellsberg. Now, we don't need to go into the internal details of Ellsberg's project. How about the careers, right? The people who said Ellsberg is great, who were they, right? Noam Chomsky, Howard Zinn praised Ellsberg, right? It's authentic, it's wonderful, it's a new world. One guy who didn't praise it, who attacked it, was Mort Saul, and the comedian who is still alive. And Mort Saul was out there saying, this is garbage. And he had joined the Garrison inquiry in New Orleans into the JFK murder. And he was a big critic of the Warren Commission. And that was the end of his career. It was career suicide for Mort Saul to come out and attack the Pentagon Papers. Whereas for Chomsky and Zinn, it made them celebrities. Also, the people who gave the Pentagon Papers to Ellsberg, Morton Halperin and Leslie Gelb, both went on to have glittering careers after the fact. Leslie Gelb became the head of the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. Morton Halperin, even today, is the political boss of the Soros group of foundations. Now, the limited hangouts have almost nothing concerning the real big covert operations, right? The JFK,
like as in WikiLeaks.
JFK and 9/11. Both of these, you get nothing. Right? You look at the Pentagon Papers, there's nothing about the JFK assassination. Nothing. It's almost like it never happened. They do, of course, demonize Kennedy, demonize politicians. They whitewash the CIA on drug running, on assassinations, Operation Phoenix. And, of course, this is all, it's well known, but that's not what you get from the Pentagon Papers. So then in the case of Assange, it's a little bit different because he comes out of an MK Ultra operation, right? But his mind is already mush because of all the LSD that he
has. As maybe was the case with Oswald.
Quite possibly.
Yes. New book by Hank Albarelli detailing
the main thing we're trying to get to
intersections.
The great limited hangout artists have nothing about this, and they're even angry, right? Assange says he's so annoyed when people want to know about 9/11 because that's not important. He's so annoyed that they're distracted.
And remind the audience, in case they're not familiar, the great Noam Chomsky, he says, yes, so what? If it happened that way, that's what elites do all the time.
But, of course, he's not doing the limited hangout, right? So that's the difference, or maybe he is. But, look, the other thing
we got a limited hangout because there's a commercial break.
Our next installment is the Damascus Road conversion of Ellsberg and of this Snowden.
What an interesting way to frame it. It's biblical, it's geographical, and it's historical. All right, friends, right back with...
That's the war.
All right, good friends. Some of that new bumper music. Follow the leaders. Yeah. Just don't think, just follow the leaders. That's a great song that illustrates that point from the 1980s. But anyhow, back to Dr. Webster Tarpley. One more segment. Friends, tarpley.net. Go there. Be challenged, be informed, be aggravated, whatever you want, but go there, whatever. He's got also a great show on a couple of networks, at least other networks, but on Saturdays, you can find out all about that if you go to his website. It's all
on tarpley.net. And if I may, Twitter feed, Webster G. Tarpley, because when it's fast moving, you got to keep up with that. The Twitter feed is the way to get the one-line news. Now, just this Damascus Road thing. Right,
last 10 minutes or so. Go for it.
Ellsberg was a complete warmonger. He was a strangelove. He was a nuclear planner. He worked for the Rand Corporation. He worked directly for Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara in Vietnam. He worked for CIA General Edward Lansdale, right, the ugly American General Hillendale. The Oliver Stone movie more or less indicates him as the organizer of the Kennedy assassination. So here's Ellsberg. He actually describes the Damascus Road conversion. He says he was at Haverford College in Pennsylvania in August 1969. He heard a speech from a draft resistor who was going to jail. He fell on the ground. He rolled and cried. And then when he got up, he was anti-war. So he started taking the documents, giving them to Senator Kennedy and then the New York Times. Now, I think this is a completely fantastic, unbelievable story. Assange, as I said, is from MK Ultra. And Snowden, well...
You said it because of that experience he had in Australia, right?
Yeah, in other words, his childhood,
the cult he was raised
whole
in.
childhood, he was in an LSD cult of MK Ultra, the Ann Hamilton Byrne cult. It's all in the article, and we got to get to the point now. The Snowden is somebody who starts as a warmonger. He wants to be in the special forces. He wants to go and kill Iraqis to make them free, and then now we're supposed to believe this same guy a few years later is now concerned with civil liberties. Snowden, of course, has got this great timing. We've talked about that. The other thing, of course, is the limited Hangout prepares the large covert operation. The Pentagon Papers are the direct preparation of Watergate, and most people don't understand still what Watergate was. You have these leaks. Kissinger goes to Nixon, says, we got to stop the leaks, create the plumbers. Nixon foolishly creates the plumbers. Who do you get in the plumbers? Top CIA agent Howard Hunt, top CIA communications man James McCord, FBI thug G. Gordon Liddy. Along comes Woodward of the Office of Naval Intelligence, having served on the president's floating command post.
Who just happens to be in the court that night when these guys are brought through.
Top secret security clearance and all that. So then what you get then is a scandal that weakens the presidency much more than just Nixon, right? So we're still dealing with the weakening of the presidency, because that's really the explanation. A lot of people think it's a strong presidency. It's not. It's pathetically weak. Assange, of course, it's the Arab Spring. But look, as a result of Assange's dump, nobody from U.S., Britain, Israel, no politician is ruined. No covert operation is blown. Who are the targets? Ben Ali of Tunisia, Gaddafi of Libya, Mubarak of Egypt, Saleh of Yemen, Assad of Syria, all of them gone except Assad. Maliki of Iraq was targeted, Karzai of Afghanistan, Rodriguez Kirchner of Argentina, Berlusconi of Italy, who was ousted, and Putin of Russia. They tried to get him, but he was too much for them. So now the question is, what's the covert op with Snowden? And we can see it's the Syria war. In other words, immediately short term, weaken Obama, destroy Obama's relation with his base, cut him adrift, and put him in a situation where he has no choice but to follow the orders from London and from Paris. And I urge you to look at the recent statements of Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is at this moment anti-wider war in Syria, right? You have to understand also.
Always enigmatic, usually because it's not his idea, right?
No, it's a different policy. There's one policy that says drones, targeted assassination, cyber warfare, economic sanctions. That's a low-risk policy. Lead from behind. Let France attack Libya. Let Turkey attack Syria, but not you, not the U.S. Don't do it. Let them do it. Make them do it. Lead them from behind. And then the other policy is what, of course, Britain and France and the neocons and the Israelis want is U.S. attacks Syria big time, 1 month or more of air war, right? 1 month if they're lucky, and planes shot down, I assure you, and warships sunk, very likely.
And munitions expended, and munitions having to be repurchased by the cartels.
Yeah, it's that does come into it, but it's mainly that they want world domination, and then these other interests pile on. Now, the other thing is China, right? You can see that the revelations, what he says, the U.S. is hacking China. A lot of tension now between the U.S. and China. This inserts itself into a pre-existing campaign, right, where the Obama had been saying, the U.S. government says China is hacking us, and then they have this summit and all this other stuff.
But we never hack ourselves. Who, us?
And then there's the Europe, right, with the tension with Putin and the others at this conference that's just going on now. But now there's a deeper level. If you look at Hong Kong, you will see that there's a movement of Chinese dupes in Hong Kong supporting Snowden, that he's their culture hero, right? He's for internet freedom. And, of course, the big issue that the CIA wants to push, the original WikiLeaks issue for China, is computer transparency and attack the Great Wall of China, right? And this has been going on since late 2009, 2010. Now, here's the strategic perspective, Noah, and this is really the essential part. Please let me get through this. We have some rumblings in the left liberal community that this guy is a fraud. And I want to say, first of all, hats off to Naomi Wolf. You know Naomi Wolf, right? She's a feminist.
Yes,
Was
here in New York.
Advisor to Al Gore's campaign.
Yeah.
Okay.
The brown tie woman.
Naomi Wolf, not Klein, but Naomi Wolf. My creeping concern that the NSA leaker is not who he purports to be. My creeping concern is that the NSA leaker is not who he purports to be, and the motivations involved in the story may be more complex than they appear to be. Now, it's all very cautious, but she's essentially saying, I don't believe this guy. She says, I'm so reluctant to cast any skepticism on this wonderful, epic of heroism and all that, but she does. And she has arguments which I don't know if these arguments have particular merit, but it's good that she's doing what she's doing. There's also a guy, he calls himself Willie Loman, and he writes about, let's see, this guy's name is Scott Creighton. I have no idea who this is.
I don't know who he is either, but I just reposted one of his things where Douglas Valentine deconstructed, Jeremy Scahill's so-called investigative thing. Yeah,
so
go ahead.
Maybe this has some merit. So essentially what this guy points to is that Greenwald, right, the journalist, right, the Bob Woodward of this thing, Greenwald in the 90s worked for Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen, and Katz.
Wow.
This is mergers and acquisitions, J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, Larry Silverstein, for those of you who remember him, and Bernard Nussbaum is a partner. He's White House counsel to Clinton. Rabid supporter of Bradley Manning and WikiLeaks. Essentially,
rabid antagonist to 9/11 Truth.
9/11 Truth. Ultimately, after much angst, he supports the attack on Libya, certainly doesn't oppose it, accepts the Boston events at face value, is on with Bill Moyers.
Darling of Rachel Maddow.
There we go. And Amy Goodman tonight.
And Amy Goodman, of course.
A 1.5 hour embrace, a love fest between Amy Goodman.
Did we even need to bring that up? It should be assumed.
No, but it's important to see. So the usual suspects, right? The usual cartel. So here's what I propose to people. Get out there and fight. If you've got Twitter, if you've got a website, if you've got any means, go on chat rooms, get on websites, get yourself a screen name, fight back. This guy can be taken down. In other words, there's already enough skepticism, thanks in particular to Naomi Wolf. The answer is yes, Naomi Wolf is absolutely right. This is a fraud, and don't believe it. And get your attention back to Syria. In other words, the job right now is not to attack Obama. It's not. It's to attack the principal warmongers, Cameron of Britain, Haig, the foreign secretary in London, Hollande of France, and Fabius, his foreign minister, right? Those guys are the big loudmouths about chemical weapons and all this garbage. You want to attack McCain, you want to attack Lindsey Graham because they're demanding war. And Obama is adrift. And again, if you can't see this, you really should, get some better grounding
glasses
political analysis, because it's very obvious. Obama is dragging his feet. He's reluctant. He's vacillating. He's feckless. He's all this other stuff.
Ray McGovern says he's afraid of getting the Martin Luther King treatment.
That's right, as he says. Right, we went through this last week. Now, I'm sorry to see that a lot of the main so-called libertarian, sort of Rand Paul sites are completely naive on this, right?
Well, Rand Paul did vote to try to block this, army, going into the Syria conflict, right?
Yeah, but you got to get in. You got to get down here and grapple, right? You've got to get in and say this is a fraud. Glenn Greenwald is a fraud. Snowden is a fraud. The London Guardian is a fraud. This documentary filmmaker is no great shakes either, and we don't believe it. In other words, go back and do what Mort Saul tried to do to the Pentagon paper.
Well, there's a great Mort Saul story I have. I don't have time. But, one of the great things, Dr. Tarpley, why we like to have you on the show is that you are flexible. Sometimes people like Obama, who were a fraud, can rise to the occasion on an issue-by-issue basis. So we appreciate you for that.
That's very important. You've got to be intelligent and realistic. You got to have a good intelligence picture, and you got to be responding to current events, to the current situation right now. and not do it on the basis of your
current situation. Is that's all the time we have. Webster Tarpley.